Welcome to Points to Ponder. In this December series, we are focusing on the idea of healing as a culture. We focused on justice in October, on truth-telling in November, and another aspect of that whole truth-telling and justice triad is the idea that healing as a culture is important for the safety of truth to be told and important for the reality of justice to be done. And so today, as we continue that series, I've invited my friend Annie Wong Smith to join me for this session. Annie, would you tell everybody a little about yourself?
Sure. I am a career scientist. I help conduct clinical trials and ensure that they're run according to FDA regulations and other regulations. And my work experience also includes working in quality assurance in the food industry. So that's whether it's food or drugs or devices, or in this particular job where I'm working on a vaccine, it's all been in some way some kind of research or regulatory capacity. But in another part of my life, I've also served in various capacities in ministry, and with the St. Luke's community, I coordinated volunteers at Common Ground Cafe. I also serve on the evangelism task force of the Diocese of East Tennessee. So if I had to summarize what that's about, I guess I have a passion for cultivating communities and eliminating barriers to relationship. And so because of that background and experience, I think this quote has really spoken to the different kinds of experiences and communities.
Good. So let's go ahead and get to that because I did invite you here because of your experience with cultivating community, and especially cultivating communities that have the opportunity possibly to help transform people, or in other words, heal some of the breaches that we see just through the relationships. So the quote that Annie mentioned that I gave her for this session on transforming communities is this. It's from Grace Lee Boggs, and I quote, "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it."
The words that really stand out to me are responsibility and belonging. And in a life of faith, I think those two things are a real call to explore how we're all invited into a sense of wholeness or connectedness with each other. An invitation to see how our fellow companions on the road of life are a part of how we see ourselves and a part of our communities. If someone asks me, "Where are you from?" my answer depends on the context. It'll be different. Because what I say, and I'm very conscious of this, what I say potentially affects my relationship with the person who's asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, there is not a single identity that I carry around with me that is a pat answer when people ask me where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps that orientation is a fundamentally non-American kind of orientation, because I'm aware that that whatever I say to that question then frames the relationship that I have with the person who's asking. Mm-hmm. But I'm also very aware that whatever I answer, I would wish for that answer to not alienate me.
Mm-hmm.
from a potential relationship with the other person in the exchange.
I mean, I think it's a part of an ongoing conversation, because what we're talking about is the building of different communities of support, and some of those have to do with people in certain situations together, like the community, the support that you helped build at the cafe was about people in a certain socioeconomic state that wasn't particularly helpful to them in their life, people that were hungry, and people that some were homeless, and or people that maybe had homes but were stuck in substandard housing. And so building community looked like one thing there. Your experience at Tyson House on the campus of UT, the Lutheran and Episcopal campus ministry there, and help building community there. Those were groups of students coming from all over the place in different ways. I know you sort of, for a little while, built a little bit of community around some of the immigrant community here in town when you got them to participate in speaking their language for certain things. So I would say that what you said must be a thread that runs through it for you in all of those cases, because in one way or another, all of those people would ask you where you're from. As well as the volunteers there. So have you found that having to deal with that question and the kinds of things that come up with you, is that helpful in beginning to build community, or has it been an obstacle you have to cross?
I found that as someone who's Southern, who navigates a mostly white society that sees race in terms of black and white. Mm-hmm. I am non-binary. Mm-hmm. I'm from a statistical standpoint, I'm other. Mm. No matter how you slice the pie, I'm not going to fit. But what's a wonderful possibility is that when you don't fit the categories, mm-hmm. is that the flip side of that is I can fit in each category. Mm-hmm. So there's this strange liminal sort of space that I inhabit that's in between, because I'm not white, mm-hmm. but I'm white. I can function as a white passing person. Mm-hmm. And I'm not black, but I can function as a minority passing person. Mm-hmm. And all of those things are contextual and very complicated. Mm-hmm.
So you bring the necessity to actually think it through as you enter into these various communities. It sounds like.
Well, I guess I make it sound like that it's exhausting, but it's not nearly that hard. I think that is because that's just my normal. Mm-hmm.
Why don't maybe you could tell me a little bit about some of these specific examples, because you seem to rise to leadership in the communities that you enter into. So just think about one of the ones. It could be the Tyson House, it could be cafe, it could be some other one that maybe I don't even know about. But tell me the story basically of entering that community and what that looked like, and what kinds of things you think that being a part of that community required of you and gave to you.
Yes, let's start with St. Luke's Cafe.
Okay.
So what could a person who outwardly with my appearance possibly have in common with the guests and volunteers and other people who inhabit the space at St. Luke's Cafe? Because someone who doesn't know me might say, well, this is someone who has a master's degree, who lives in an affluent part of town, who speaks multiple languages, who must not have any kind of intersection with residents, guests, neighbors in the Five Points area. But what that person who's judging me doesn't know is that I grew up in rural Appalachia. I think what I recognize, that back to this idea of belonging, seeing yourself as belonging and responsible in some way, that what I recognize and what I have in common with our guests at the pantry is that I know what it's like to be from somewhere that no one appreciates or respects, or really or really pays much attention to. And that's an experience that I can relate to on a personal level because of where I'm from.
It sounds a little bit like, perhaps along with the elements of responsibility and belonging, there's also an element of identification, of being able to pull something from your own experience out that identifies, at least on some level, with the experience of the people in community together. Do you think that's true?
Yes, and some of that is because of my very particular experience. But then on another level, I think that there is a kind of poverty of relationship that I was experiencing. And for me to be able to coordinate volunteers and put my energy into being at cafe and being with people. This isn't even about being with poor people I can help, but simply with being with people and seeking connection with people. That was a need that I had that our volunteers and our guests were able to fill for me.
I think that as we've looked at things that had to do with justice and had to do with healing, two things that stand out there altogether are the fact that in terms of justices and injustices, you have communities of people who are being affected greatly by the injustice, and you have communities of people that are the people that are keeping that injustice going, even if they don't realize it. And that and that truth telling is necessary for anything to happen. But as I think about healing, I wonder how do you kind of bridge that gap there to become community together? Because I think maybe the healing happens when we are in community, not necessarily when we're just two disjointed groups trying to make an idea better. Have you found that to be true in any of your experience?
I think perhaps an analogy in healthcare might be helpful.
Okay.
There's a difference I found in healing and curing. That is what you're describing is an effort to combat and to right a wrong in society. That to me sounds like a cure in the field of healthcare. The cure is to eliminate a disease. Now, to focus on curing is different from healing. Because to cure, if the focus is to eliminate the disease, something must be conquered or driven out or made right so that the body is cured. That's actually bound to fail ultimately. And the reason is that we're all dying. So a cure can, let's say if you're doing research to cure cancer, yes, it is true. There can be a cure that can be found by means of scientific endeavors, human structures, whatever. But on the other hand, we are all bound to mortal bodies which have expiration dates. So that cure is only temporary.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, if you talk about healing, that is a different kind of thing. That has more of a theological bent to it, that seeks to bring about a more fundamental change in a person and across a society. And when I consider the term healing, that to me has more along the lines of inviting into restoration,
Mm-hmm.
into reconciliation. And to me, particularly in this Advent season, healing to me sounds more hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than trying to find a cure for whatever ism or injustice is in our society by saying this is the way to proceed, and then you have a prescription, right? So you say prescription is for this group of people to act in this way, prescription for this group of people to act in this way. That might not be the best orientation. I'd like, well, in a very idealistic way, I'd like to consider whether instead of curing in that fashion, that our outlook can be, our orientation can be towards healing and restoring connection with each other, because that connectedness, in that connectedness is a wholeness and a potential for reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. And it's that connectedness, I think, also that actually brings around transformation instead of just a fix.
Absolutely. Restoration through relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And relationship and that restoration is built into the structure of our faith. Because if you look at the Trinity as an illustration, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. There's a connectedness, and the Word was God. So that Creator and Word and Holy Spirit together carry a connectedness that is part of the divine nature. Mm-hmm. So if the divine nature is fundamentally interconnectedness and relationality, and if we truly believe we are made in the image of God, then what that means is that we individually each come from community. We live our lives in community, marinating in community, even if we feel like we're apart. Mm-hmm. Even if somehow connectedness with people and relationship with people seems beyond reach, and even when we're alone, we are never apart from community. And then finally, when we are freed from our bodies, we return back to the source of community. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think the thread of community runs through the life of most of us, either good experiences or sometimes not so good experiences. As you look back through your life, can you tell me any story about a community that reached out to you and helped you find something you needed to find, or make a change you needed to make, or supported you where you were? Is there a time in your life when you can think of a community that made a difference for you?
I am Taiwanese Appalachian. And I'd like to share a story about an encounter with someone who reminded me who I am. And this was a few years ago. I was on a plane from Arkansas back to Tennessee, where I lived with my husband. And so I'm boarding the plane, and someone comes to sit beside me, and he asks me the dreaded question, where are you from? So, you know, I in typical fashion, am quite evasive. And my default when someone asks me, where are you from, is to answer in the way that is most likely to be interpreted as, I'm from here. Or in other words, I am part of an us. We are a common thing. Mm-hmm. So for me, looking at this middle-aged Southern white man who sat beside me, and I'm wondering, okay, I go into full evasive mode because I'm not going to tell him that my ancestors were from X, Y, Z. So my first response is, I'm from here. I graduated from high school in Arkansas, and my parents are here, and I just had a great visit with them. And so, you know, I think, oh, shoot, I've avoided that question. The last thing I want to do is to be stuck on a plane from Arkansas to Tennessee with someone who wants to tell me about the last Vietnamese restaurant we went to, or whatever. So I just feel like I have just avoided this potential catastrophe. But later on, you know, we're still making small talk. He asks again, where are you from? And I go, oh, no, this is a dreaded question again. So then I said, well, actually, you know, you're right. I'm not from Arkansas. I'm from Tennessee, and I'm on my way home. And again, I give him the answer that I think is saying, I am one of you. You know, I'm Southern. This, you know, I insist that I am one of you. And I find out that was also not the answer that he was looking for. And this wonderfully patient person in making small talk, very friendly, finally realizes he's getting nowhere by asking. So he tells me that he's a businessman on a trip. He'll be away from home. And finally, when I hear his story, I learned that he has a wife who is mixed race, the daughter of a white American and a Korean mother. And he has children who are part Korean. And so what I did not realize in my haste to assure him that I was one of his tribe, what I did not know that he was asking me, I did not realize that he was asking me the whole time, are you one of us? And we just had a really lovely conversation. It was something that I needed to hear. Mm-hmm. And what I learned in that exchange was that what he wanted to know, or what he was trying to convey to me, but I wasn't able to hear, was that when he saw my face, it reminded him of his family. And I was one of us. I just wasn't able to hear it.
Thank you so much, Annie, for telling that story, for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it, and God bless you.
Glad to be here.